When Chinara felt the fabric slip from her body that morning, she knew she had made a terrible mistake. The air turned cold against her skin, colder than any harmattan wind she had ever felt. And in that moment, as the intimate garment fell to the floor of her hut, she heard it, a sound like 1,000 voices wailing from deep within the earth. The old woman's warning echoed in her mind, but it was too late. The curse had been awakened. Chinara was born in the small village of Umoja, nestled between the great river and the dense forest where spirits were said to walk. She came into this world during a terrible storm, when lightning split the oldest baobab tree in two and rain flooded the cassava fields. Her mother died bringing her into the world, and the village elders whispered that the girl carried her mother's death like a shadow. She grew up in her grandmother's compound, a girl so thin you could count her ribs like the slats of a woven basket. Her skin was dark as fertile soil after rain, but there was something in her eyes, something that made people look away, a depth, a sadness that seemed older than her years. The women of Umoja whispered when she passed, their wrappers swishing as they turned. "That one is marked," they said, while pounding yam in their mortars. "Born in blood and storm, no man will want her." And it seemed they were right. Chinara reached the age when girls become women, when breasts grow full and hips widen to carry children, but no man looked her way. She wore simple wrappers of faded cloth, her head wrap always tied hastily, as if she had no time to care for her appearance. At the market, she sat alone with her baskets of smoked fish, watching other girls laugh with suitors who brought them cowrie shells and bronze bracelets. But Chinara had a gift, though she did not know it yet. When she sang, even the birds stopped their chatter to listen. Her voice was like honey flowing over stones, sweet and smooth and impossible to ignore. The river itself seemed to quiet when she washed clothes at its banks, humming the old songs her grandmother taught her. One day, as the dry season began to crack the earth, a trader came to Umoja. His name was Obi, and he wore fine wrappers dyed with indigo, his neck heavy with beads that clicked when he walked. He was not from their village, not from any village nearby, and his eyes moved over everything like a man counting wealth. He sold cloth and palm oil, clay pots and iron tools, and the women of Umoja crowded around his wares like chickens, fighting over scattered grain. Chinara stood at the edge of the market, as she always did, watching but not participating. And then she began to hum. Just a small sound, barely louder than the wind through the raffia palms. But Obi heard it. His head turned sharply, and his eyes found her across the crowded market square. He pushed through the throng of women, his fine wrapper dragging in the dust, until he stood before her. "You," he said, his voice rough like dry leaves, "sing for me." And she did. Chinara opened her mouth and let the song flow out, a melody about the river and the fish and the way moonlight dances on water. Every person in the market stopped. Women lowered their calabashes. Men paused mid-bargain. Children ceased their running. The world held its breath. When the last note faded, Obi smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who has found something valuable that others have overlooked. "You will be my wife," he declared, loud enough for the entire village to hear. "I will pay any bride price." The villagers gasped. Some covered their mouths with their hands. Others whispered urgently to their neighbors. The girl no one wanted, the girl marked by death and storm, was being claimed by this wealthy trader. The elders gathered under the great tree that evening, shaking their heads and muttering into their palm wine gourds. "This will not end well," the oldest said, adjusting the wrapper around his thin shoulders. "A man who wants a woman for her voice alone has hunger in his heart that voice cannot fill." But Chinara's grandmother was old and tired, and the bride price Obi offered would feed her for the rest of her days. The marriage was arranged. 3 moons later, as the first rains began to soften the earth, Chinara left her grandmother's compound and went to live with Obi in his large hut on the edge of the village. At first, it seemed the elders had been wrong. Obi was kind to Chinara. He brought her fine wrappers of many colors, head wraps embroidered with golden thread, beads for her neck and waist that caught the light like captured stars. He asked her to sing for him every evening as the sun set, and she did, her voice filling their compound as the cooking fires were lit throughout Umoja. The villagers walked past and listened, their faces softening. "Perhaps," they whispered to each other at the river, "perhaps we were wrong about that girl." But one night, exactly 4 moons after their marriage, Chinara woke to find Obi gone from their sleeping mat. She rose, wrapping a cloth around herself, and followed the sound of voices to the edge of the forest. There, in a clearing lit by a single torch, she saw her husband speaking with a woman she had never seen before. The stranger was ancient, bent like a tree that has weathered too many storms. Her wrapper was the color of dried blood, and her eyes reflected the torchlight like an animal's. Around her neck hung shells and bones that rattled with each breath. Obi was giving her something, cowrie shells, many of them, spilling from his hands into hers like water. "You promised me," Obi was saying, his voice desperate. "You said if I married the girl with the voice, if I brought her to you, you would give me what I seek." The old woman's laughter was like wind through a graveyard. "And I will, traitor. But first, she must wear it. This." She held up something small, something that gleamed in the torchlight. An intimate garment, delicate as spider web, woven with threads that seemed to shimmer with their own light. "It is blessed and cursed in equal measure," the old woman said. "As long as she wears it, her voice will bring you wealth beyond imagining. Every song will be like casting a spell. People will come from distant villages to hear her, and they will pay. They will pay until they have nothing left to give." "And the curse?" Obi's voice trembled. "She must never remove it, not to bathe, not to sleep, never. If she does, everything you have gained will crumble to dust, and more, much more. The debt must be paid, traitor. Always, the debt must be paid." Chinara's hand flew to her mouth to stifle her gasp, but a twig snapped beneath her foot. Obi's head whipped around, and his eyes found her in the darkness. For a moment, husband and wife stared at each other across the clearing. Then Obi smiled, and it was the same smile he had given her in the market, the smile of a man who has found something valuable. "My beloved wife," he said smoothly, walking toward her. "Come. There is something I want to give you, a gift." The old woman vanished into the forest like smoke dissipating in wind. Obi took Chinara's hand, his grip too tight, and led her back to their compound. Inside their hut, by the light of a single oil lamp, he showed her the garment. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The fabric seemed to shift colors as it moved, from deep crimson to gold to the purple of twilight. "Wear this," Obi said, and his voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard. "It is a gift from a healer, blessed for fertility and prosperity. You must wear it always, my wife. It will bring us good fortune." Chinara took the garment in her hands. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Obi what she had heard in the forest. But she was young, and he was her husband, and the old ways said a wife must obey. So she put it on, feeling the fabric settle against her skin like a second layer of flesh. That night, when she sang, her voice was transformed. It was no longer simply beautiful. It was magic. It was irresistible. It reached into the souls of those who heard it and wrapped around their hearts like vines around a tree. Word spread through Umoja faster than wildfire. By the next market day, people from neighboring villages were arriving, walking for hours just to hear the woman with the enchanted voice. They came with offerings: cowrie shells and bronze bracelets, baskets of yam and smoked meat, carved wooden stools, and clay pots of palm oil. They came and listened, and when Chinara sang, they wept. They laughed. They remembered joys they had forgotten and mourned losses they had buried. And they paid. They paid until their purses were empty and their homes were bare. Obi grew wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. His compound expanded. He hired workers to build more huts, to cultivate more land. He adorned Chinara in the finest wrappers, the heaviest beads, head wraps so elaborate they took an hour to tie. She became famous throughout the region, the woman with the voice that could break hearts and heal souls. But Chinara herself was breaking. The garment never came off, not when she bathed in the river, the water sliding over the magical fabric without wetting it. Not when she slept, tossing and turning on her mat as the cloth grew tighter, more constricting. Not when the dry season heat made her skin burn and her throat ache with thirst. She could feel it changing her, feeding on something deep inside her soul. Her songs grew more powerful, but her spirit grew weaker. The villagers noticed. Women at the market whispered behind their hands. "Did you see her eyes?" they said, while selecting yams. Empty, like a calabash with no bottom. The men drinking palm wine under the great tree shook their heads. "Obi has cursed his own wife for wealth," they muttered. "The spirits will demand payment for this." 2 years passed, then 3. Chinara sang, and people came and paid, and Obi grew richer still. But the woman who sang was no longer the girl from the market. She moved like a ghost through her own life, her wrapper hanging loose on her thinning frame, despite all Obi's attempts to fatten her with the finest foods. Her skin, once dark and vibrant as fertile soil, turned ashen. Her eyes, once deep with feeling, became flat as river stones. And then, one evening, she could bear it no more. Obi had left to visit another village, to arrange for Chinara to perform at a great festival where wealthy chiefs and traders would gather. She was alone in their compound, and the weight of the magical garment felt like carrying stones on her shoulders. She looked down at herself, at the shimmering fabric that had become her prison, and something inside her shattered like a clay pot falling from a great height. She reached down with trembling fingers and began to remove it. The moment the fabric left her body, the world changed. The air turned cold, so cold her breath came out in visible clouds, though it was the height of the dry season. The lamp flames turned blue, flickering wildly. And then the sound began. A wailing, a crying, a howling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Chinara felt it first in her voice. The magic that had sustained it, that had made it more than human, was draining away like water through a broken calabash. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a harsh croak emerged, rough as a crow's call. Her beautiful voice, her gift, was gone. But that was only the beginning. By morning, when Obi returned to their compound, he found devastation. The large huts he had built had collapsed in the night, their supporting beams rotted through as if by centuries of termites. The fields of yam and cassava were withered, the plants brown and dead. The calabashes of cowrie shells had split open, spilling shells that had turned to dust. Every bit of wealth, every sign of prosperity, every evidence of his fortune had crumbled to nothing. And in the center of the compound, sitting on the bare earth with the magical garment lying beside her like a discarded snakeskin, was Chinara. Obi's scream could be heard throughout the village. People came running, their wrappers flapping as they raced to see what catastrophe had befallen the wealthy trader. They gathered at the compound entrance, gasping and pointing. "The curse," they whispered to each other. "The debt is being paid." "What you gain through dark magic," the elders said, nodding their wrinkled heads, "you will lose through darker means." But the curse was not finished. Over the following moons, everything Obi touched turned to ruin. He tried to trade in other villages, but his goods spoiled before he could sell them. He tried to plant new crops, but the earth rejected his seeds. He tried to rebuild his compound, but every structure collapsed within days. The man who had been wealthy beyond measure became poorer than the poorest beggar. His fine wrappers became rags. His bronze bracelets were sold for handfuls of dried fish. His body grew thin, his eyes hollow, his spirit broken. The villagers watched his fall with a mixture of pity and righteousness. Mothers pointed him out to their daughters as a warning. "See what becomes of those who trade in dark magic," they said, pulling their children close. "See what happens to men who use their wives as tools for wealth." But Chinara's fate was different and equally terrible. Without the magical garment, without her enchanted voice, she was nothing. Less than nothing. The women who had once envied her beauty and the men who had once paid to hear her sing now turned their backs when she approached. She wandered the village like a ghost, wearing a tattered wrapper, her head wrap long since lost, her body thin as bamboo stalks. She had lost her voice, but worse, she had lost herself. The years of wearing the cursed garment had drained something essential from her soul. She could not remember who she had been before Obi, before the magic, before the curse. She was empty. It was on the darkest night of the year, when the moon hid its face and the stars seemed dim, that Chinara made her way into the forbidden forest. She walked until she reached the ancestral tree, its trunk split by the lightning from her birth night, and there she sat down to die. But death did not come. Instead, the old woman appeared, the same ancient creature who had given Obi the cursed garment, who had set this tragedy in motion. She materialized from the shadows, her wrapper the color of dried blood, her eyes reflecting what little light filtered through the trees. "So," the old woman said, her voice echoing as if coming from deep within the earth, "you have learned." Chinara could only stare, her ruined voice unable to form words. The old woman sat beside her, bones creaking. "Do you know why I gave your husband that garment? Do you understand the purpose of the curse?" Chinara shook her head slowly. "I am the keeper of balance," the old woman said. "When a man seeks to profit from magic, when he would use another person's gift for his own greed, the spirits demand payment. Your husband heard of your voice, but he did not value you. He valued what you could bring him, and so I gave him what he wanted, but with the price already built in. Wealth gained through exploitation always crumbles. Always." She reached out and touched Chinara's throat with fingers that felt like dried leaves. Warmth spread through Chinara's body, gentle as morning sun. "Your voice was never in the garment," the old woman said. "It was always inside you. The garment only amplified it, twisted it into something unnatural. But the true voice, the gift you were born with, that is still there, buried, waiting." Chinara felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening, like air rushing into a space that had been sealed shut. "But you must choose," the old woman continued. "You can have your voice back, your true voice, not the cursed magic, but the real gift. But if you take it, you must use it with wisdom. You must sing for joy, not for profit, for healing, not for wealth. If you can promise this, if you can learn from what has happened, then you will be restored." Chinara nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she understood. She had been given a gift and watched it be corrupted by greed. She had worn the curse of another's ambition, but now she could choose differently. The old woman smiled, and this time there was kindness in it. She pressed something into Chinara's hand. Not the cursed garment, but simple prayer beads, worn smooth by generations of use. "These are blessed by your grandmother's spirit," she said. "Wear them and remember, your voice is not for sale. Your gift is not a tool for others to exploit. You are not a means to wealth. You are a woman with a soul, with value beyond what you can produce." And then she was gone, melted back into the forest shadows, as if she had never been. Chinara sat under the split baobab tree as dawn broke, and as the first light touched her face, she opened her mouth and sang. It was not the magical, irresistible voice that had enslaved listeners. It was something else, something real and raw and beautiful in its imperfection. It was her voice, her true voice. The voice she was born with, before greed and magic had twisted everything. She sang of loss and learning, of being used and becoming whole, of the price of ambition and the value of authenticity. And as she sang, she felt her spirit knitting back together, piece by piece, like a wrapper being woven on a loom. She returned to Umoja as the sun rose fully. The villagers stared as she walked through the settlement, her tattered wrapper flapping, the prayer beads around her neck catching the light. She went to her grandmother's old compound, long since fallen into disrepair, and she began to rebuild. Slowly, carefully, with her own hands, Chinara reconstructed her life. She caught fish in the river and sold them at market. She sang while she worked, and people stopped to listen, but now they listened freely, with joy, not under a spell. Some brought her small gifts, a handful of yam, a new wrapper, a clay pot. Not payment, but kindness, community, and Obi? He left Umoja, unable to bear the weight of his shame and poverty. Some said he went to distant villages, trying to trade, but finding only failure. Others said he died alone on a roadside, his body thin as dry cassava stalks, his spirit broken. The villagers spoke of him as a warning, the way they spoke of all those who chose greed over goodness. Years passed. Chinara grew older, her body stronger, her spirit healed. She never married again. She didn't need to. She had learned that her worth was not in what she could give to a husband, not in what her gifts could earn, not in the magic she could wield. Her worth was in herself, in her humanity, in her voice raised in honest song, not cursed enchantment. She became a teacher of sorts, though she never claimed the title. Young girls came to her, asking her to teach them to sing, and she did. But more than that, she taught them their value. "You are not a tool," she told them while they sat in her compound grinding cassava. "You are not a means to wealth. Whatever gift you carry, it is yours. Let no one steal it. Let no one curse it with their greed." And on quiet evenings, when the cooking fires were lit and the village settled into night, Chinara would sit outside her hut and sing. Just sing. For the joy of it, for the healing of it. For the simple pleasure of using the gift she had been given in the way it was meant to be used. The villagers would stop their evening tasks and listen, and they would smile, and they would remember the girl who had been used and broken and made whole again. Remember the lesson she taught without trying to teach. That true wealth is not in cowrie shells or bronze bracelets. That true value is not in magical voices or cursed garments. That the greatest gift any person can give is to live authentically, to refuse to be a tool for another's greed, and to use whatever talents they possess for healing rather than harm. And they lived with this wisdom, passing it down to their children and their children's children. The story of Chinara became a tale told at evening fires throughout the region, a warning about greed, a lesson about worth, a reminder that when someone tries to turn your gift into their profit, when they wrap you in curses disguised as blessings, the only way to break free is to remember who you truly are beneath the magic. And so they learned that a person's value lies not in what they can produce, but in the integrity of their spirit. That gifts are meant to be shared freely, not exploited for gain, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. The end.